Hello, this is Magnus, and today I wanted to run a couple of more tests with the cameras. First, I wanted to test the microphones on each of the cameras that are onboard microphones without attachments to see when you have to do that last minute run and gun, which one you can use and which one would be more reliable without getting some interference and noise. I'm going to move around so that it forces the camera to autofocus as well, and we'll see if the microphones pick that up and then see which one is best. Next, I want to challenge these cameras with their unique codecs that each one has and to see which one without transcoding is easier to edit. We're going to test the 5D Mark IV's MJPEG codec versus the Samsung NX1 H.265 codec versus the GH5 with its 10-bit 422 files and the H.264 codec, and we'll see which one's easier to edit with present day. Now in the future, upon updates, that can change, but let's see what they work like now. Anyway, without further ado, here come the tests. Okay, here we are at the computer, and I just wanted to compare the files. Can you guess which one is which? This one's NX1, this one was the GH5. But anyway, looking at the files and the size that they recorded at, let me minimize this for a second. I wanted to show you guys what, the file sizes were like in each of the video files when I transferred them. This is the 5D Mark IV files, these are the NX1 files, and these are the GH5 video files. Now, when it came to transferring the 4K footage on each of these files, let's look at the GH5 first. 422 10-bit footage came in at just barely under 150 megabits per second, and the files for 2 minutes was over 2 gigs. Looking at the 5D Mark IV, which records at 420 at true cinema UHD, the file size itself for just over a minute was over 4 gigs. This is 2 minutes, and you've got just a little over 2 gigs. This is 4 gigs just for a minute, so that's pretty large for this specific file format. And look at the bit rate at pretty much over 525 megabits per second on this. So those type of files are huge. And then finally, we've got the NX1 with its H.265 file compression rate format with 80 megabits per second. The file was just under a minute and only 546 megabytes large. So I'd say best compression definitely goes to the NX1. And then of course you have, due to the higher bit rate you have on the GH5, of course it's going to be a little higher, but then of course you have a little 93 megabits per second off of the H.264 because the compression rate is not as good as it is in the NX1, and this is 420 format, 8-bit at 30 frames per second. So anyway, that was just a side distraction that I wanted to get to. Let's go to the Premiere file and see what we've got to work with. Now, what I did was basically I did not convert the footage. As you saw in the previous files, I just took the footage and I imported into Premiere just the way I had the folders here. I just dragged and dropped. And what I want to test first is to see how easily you can scrub through the footage and play and basically work with it. So let's start with the H.265 format of the NX1. And we're going to do it with the UHD format at 30 frames per second. So this kind of skips a little bit, but you can still see what's going on. If I try to play it here,
and this is also the audio test.
Slightly choppy, but it still plays. So that's the UHD format, but let's look at the 1080p file format. Let's see if that plays any smoother.
Whether it's the GH5, NX1.
I mean, it plays smooth, but the way it jumps around, I'd say this actually scrubs a little bit better than the other footage did, and that's probably because of the lower bit rate, but maybe my computer needed to keep up with it. So going back to here, yeah, it's slightly slower, but still you can scrub through it, you can play it, so not bad. All right, moving on, let's go to the 5D Mark IV footage. Now this Cinema 4K format in 30 frames per second. This is the MJPEG format, unconverted, and it's just pretty much dragged and dropped onto the file.
4K, Cinema 4K in other words. 4190 by
Straight off the 5D Mark IV, it actually scrubs quicker than the H.265 file format. A lot quicker, actually. Pretty easy. For a higher bit rate, it works a lot smoother. And I'd say that's because it requires less hardware rendering than an H.265 format would. Not that the H.265 format was impossible to work with. It still played pretty smoothly. And MJPEG works pretty good too, straight off the 5D Mark IV. Now, when going and converting to the 1080p footage, which this is 1080p footage off the 5D Mark IV, it's H.264 format. It's pretty traditional, pretty, pretty much used everywhere, and it should play smoothly, not an issue. Can scrub, unconverted, not a problem. Now let's go to the GH5, and the GH5 had 420 format in 8-bit in UHD, and then 422 in 10-bit. Now let's see what the 10-bit looks like when we tried to work with the 10-bit footage off of Premiere. Hit and play, and
you hear that noise of feedback.
We're at a standstill off of this format. So that's unfortunate. Being at a standstill with this format is a bit frustrating, but it would be nice to work with the 420 format and see what we can do. But when you can jump around, it takes a split second to actually catch up. But then when it does, when you try to play it, it's just not moving. So let's look at the 420 format of the GH5, and let me close these, and see what we got when you work off of just the 420 8-bit.
H.264 format.
And it's smooth. You can scrub through the footage, less of an issue. I mean, again, that's what you'd think, because it's an easier 8-bit 420 codec to work with, that you wouldn't have an issue. So, and then just for a quick reference, we'll look at the 1080p. Just as easy to work with.
Is this file?
It's smooth. So not an issue what you have from there. So now let's cut and let's look at the audio and see what you think of the audio in these next shots. Let's start with the sound test of the Samsung NX1. Now this is the Samsung NX1 recording UHD 3840 by 2160. After listening to that, it sounds pretty standard. Sounds like I'm in a room with echo. Nothing to be impressed about with this sound, and in an emergency situation where all I have is the camera and no microphone attached, this is alright. So again, audio test. Close-up footage does sound better. UHD format, as the camera focuses more on my voice and less on what's around me. Moving on to the GH5, and audio is pretty similar. UHD 3840 by 2160, 30 frames per second, and using the camera's audio. Again, nothing too special, but nothing too bad either. And seeing what its autofocus is like off of. As with the NX1, when I move closer, the recording points towards my voice and less on background. Focusing on this camera. And finally, onto the Canon 5D Mark IV, and I've got one word to describe it: unusable. And I'm going to move around a little bit. Also, I'm recording this in 30 frames per second MJPEG codec, 4K. The noise you hear is the camera refocusing as I move around. I've tested this with 3 different lenses and all produce a similar noise, despite how quiet the lenses actually are. I want to see if you guys actually pick up any camera noise as I move closer to the camera and it has to refocus, and I move farther away. Plus I want to see how easy this is to edit. So when I tested the footage with the autofocus off, the sound's okay and comparable to the other cameras. And write the script for the video, but it's on manual focus right now and I'm editing, as you can see. Nothing impressive, but it's a shame that the autofocus has an issue. I'd blame that on the microphone placement on the camera, which Canon decided to locate right next to the lens. And there you have it. Those are my tests. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought and what your opinion is. And of course, as time continues, I'm sure that at least editing might be a little bit easier with the GH5, but only time will tell. And, you know, we'll see what happens. As always, leave a like, share, and of course, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. Been a pretty hectic week. See you guys later.